Hello, I'm Amanda Walker and welcome to Inside America, the show that brings you insight and analysis of the biggest issues facing the United States right now. In today's episode, the legal, economic and political roller coaster that is Donald Trump's tariffs.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
The president insists this is the way to bring back US manufacturing, but the rest of the world is less enamored by an erratic and confusing rollout of his signature economic strategy. Courts have ruled that Trump's tariffs exceed his constitutional authority, leaving the president in a tricky spot, even with members of his own party.
One person can make a mistake, and guess what? Tariffs are a terrible mistake. They don't work, they will lead to higher prices, they are a tax, and they have historically been bad for our economy.
Coming up, we'll be asking who holds the cards in the biggest matchup of all, the US versus China.
These are two very large economies that can do significant damage to each other. And it's not in anyone's interest.
And we'll explore life on the tariff front lines. How would you characterize the journey so far when it comes to tariffs since Trump took office?
Am I allowed to swear?
No.
Okay.
So the last few months have been a whirlwind of announcements, threats and reversals. Auto tariffs have been front and center. So let's take a brief look at the ride they've been on in just the last few weeks.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. Effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles. If they can't make it in time because they have to do it here, otherwise they haven't, I'm giving them a little bit of a break, right? Not so bad. Somebody would say, oh, well, that's a change, but it's not. It's called a little flexibility. Well, I think this is, there is no tariff because what they'll do is they'll send their companies into the U.S. and build their plant.
Mr. President, Wall Street analysts have coined a new term called the taco trade. They're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, isn't that nice? Chicken out. I've never heard that. But don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question.
As all this goes on in the White House, businesses across the US have been left with whiplash. The toy industry has been feeling the strain. Most of what they sell is imported from all over the world. We went to find out how one business is coping.
If the 145% tariff were to stay in place, you're talking about this train set costing $700 to $800.
Wow.
Now,
So it's nearly doubling. Michael Bray owns Hobbyworks, a treasure trove brimming with thousands of toy trains, planes and automobiles. Most of what lines these shelves comes from outside the US.
everything on this end cap and this wall are all going to go up in price. This is an American company, Horizon, that owns these brands, but these are all made in China, 100% made in China. Those are all going to go up significantly in price if the 145% tariff stays in place. So this is something we're extremely worried about, because something like this, it's $250. This is designed for an entry-level person to be their very first plane. Now, $250 is not much for somebody who's just getting started, but what if this was $600?
They're just not going to buy it,
That's
right?
just not going to happen. And this company here is 100% made in America, but 100% of their business is making accessories for things like this.
Right.
So this is an example of an American company, 100% for, I don't know, 50 years, 75 years old, that is going to be harmed because of the tariffs being implemented on another product in another country.
So there's a lot of nuance to this, right?
There's a lot of nuance to this, and this is why tariffs are so hard. They've always been hard. We've always had tariffs. They're not a new thing. What's new is the way that we're just saying 145% on everything from China, 50% on everything from Vietnam, 30% on everything from Europe, or 50% on everything from Europe, depending on what week it is.
It's that unpredictability that's the main challenge for Michael and many other small businesses right now. How would you characterize the journey so far when it comes to tariffs since Trump took office?
Am I allowed to swear?
No.
Okay. It has been very difficult. It's been a mess, frankly. Tariffs are in place, then they're not in place. We get price lists from our suppliers, and then those price lists are subject to change. We make thousands of price changes based on tariffs that are in place for a few weeks, and then those tariffs get changed, raised, or rolled back.
So how much harder is it operating a business in this new tariff era?
It's extremely difficult. When you look at a Lego price list and you say, okay, I'm going to need 12 of this Star Wars Lego set at $159, right? Well, you'd be making a whole different decision if that set was $250. And so what's happening is we're being asked to make commitments well in advance without really knowing what the prices are going to be. And that could be a real problem come the fourth quarter. Right now, we haven't seen a lot of it because tariffs get put in place and rolled back and then put in place and rolled back again. But eventually, those, what's the saying? Those chickens are going to come home to roost.
Since February, Michael and his staff have made 8,800 price changes because of tariffs. It's exhausting trying to keep up. So, Mike, we've had 10%, 30%, 50%, 145. How do you keep track of all of this?
Well, we have spreadsheets that we get from our suppliers, some of them more sophisticated than others. Sometimes we're just getting emails, so we'll just get an email update that says this is going to happen, and then 2 weeks later we'll get an email that says never mind because they put tariffs on hold, and then we'll get another email that says, okay, that same email we sent you 2 weeks ago and said never mind, that's going to take effect in July instead of in May.
That sounds stressful to me, and I'm not having to do it.
So here's an example. So in addition to whether the price is going up and when the date of the first price increases, they're telling you all products that were shipped from China before the executive order was signed will enter the USA before March 7th. Those are exempt from the tariff. Current inventory and all products that arrive in the warehouse before the deadline will not be increased. Products arriving after March 7th will have a new selling prices, but only make a price change once the stock that came in before the March 7th date has run out.
And this is one seller and you have 230?
This is one seller, and this is a company that has less than 20 employees.
So you're on the front lines of this battle. If you could have just a few words in the president's ear right now, what would you say to him?
I would say a couple things. I would say I understand what he's trying to do, and I think the goal is admirable. I don't think this is the way to do it. I would say that I don't expect the president to be an expert on every nuance of how importing and manufacturing and things like that works, but I expect the people around him to be experts. And I think these people are wrong. I think they're incurious people making shallow decisions for selfish reasons.
They don't have the balance bar.
Republican lawmakers are worried about the politics of tariffs when the cost of living is already so elevated.
If it's going to make things worse, I mean, I'm sure there's no one that will agree that this is going to help.
People are just holding into their dollars, man, because we don't know. I was just in that store about a half hour ago trying to look for some stuff, man, and I said, wow, prices just continue to just go up, 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 up.
Filling a shopping cart is already a stretch. Asking voters to go further is risky.
I get why he's doing it. I do. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but I do get it. But again, I think he's just over the top with it.
You don't like tariffs? Why not?
It makes me more expensive. I can't think of anything else but more expensive, which I am not fond of because it's already bad enough.
The vapes are going up because they're imported from China. So what usually costs $30 is now $50. What usually costs $40 is now $60. So it's impacting like my everyday life. What's the end goal? Like, what is their goal? I'm not.
To bring manufacturing back to America, to have
have things made here. Why does that matter? As long as we get good products, why does it matter if it was made here or not?
So you're not willing to pay more for that?
No, I'm not willing to have, no. Because the products I have now are good. The cars are even made in China. So it's like American-made cars, really.
So as Michael, the business owner in our report, was saying, much of what he imports comes from China, which has surely been the wildest tariff ride. Let's take a look. In the first half of President Trump's second term, tariffs surged to more than 15 times their 2018 levels, one of the most aggressive tariff hikes in modern history. Then, on May 12th, the administration announced a surprise move, a mutual tariff reduction between the US and China. And now, in a further sign of de-escalation, both countries have agreed on a broader framework aimed at stabilizing the situation. The question now, will negotiations keep both leaders happy enough to avoid more chaos? Which does impact the whole world. The World Bank has already warned if tariffs ever surpass those previous peaks, the resulting slowdown could hit not just the US, but the global economy even harder. Anya Manuel is a former diplomat and advisor on foreign policy for the Aspen Strategy Group. She specializes in US-China relations. I asked her how she sees this new trade dynamic. Do you think the legal limbo here in the US, is that seen as a weakness on the US side? Is China looking to exploit that? And more broadly, what do you think that China's strategies are behind the scenes, beyond all the diplomatic talk?
Yeah, I think the Chinese are pushing very hard to grow their own economy, understandably, as is the US, as is the rest of the world. Xi Jinping is a tough negotiator. The people he has working for him are tough, good negotiators. And I think for them, what's paramount is what the Chinese government always says. They need to grow their economy. They also need to get advanced technologies made in China 2025. They've been implementing that plan for the past 10 years. They're well on their way. And part of that are all of the high-tech exports that we just mentioned.
And they have their own struggles, don't they? We talk a lot about the US economy and what's happening here, but the housing crash in China, they want to get these exports out. So they have their own problems to deal with. Can you remind us of what their own challenges are?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think sometimes in the United States, we don't focus as much on what's happening inside China. The Chinese government still says that they're growing at 5% a year. I don't know any reputable international economist who believes that. The estimates range from 2 to 3, maybe they're eking out 4% growth, and that growth is uneven. You mentioned the crashing property sector. That's exactly right. On some high tech, I talked to some of the high tech folks that are in China. The AI is growing like crazy. They're doing an enormously good job. Some parts of consumer are still growing, but not very many. And if you are a Chinese person, especially one who's kind of in the middle of the age group, you're often taking care of parents, grandparents, and children, and there's not much of a social safety net. So China really needs to grow, and this trade conflict with the United States is very much impacting their ability to grow, to do so.
You have all these former economic allies scrambling to get these deals you mentioned. How damaging could all of this be to put these established relationships in jeopardy like this?
Yeah, I do worry about the negotiations with the Europeans, the EU in particular, because that's a particularly difficult one because, of course, the EU speaks for all of those European economies. I think you're likely to see framework trade agreements sooner with some of our Asian allies, with the Japanese, with the Koreans. Those negotiations are ongoing with the Indians. So I think you're going to see some framework agreements here being negotiated in short order. Europe worries me. And as someone who studies US-China relations, what I would hope would happen, would be the most optimistic, is that the US and our friends and allies can reach broad agreement on some of these thorny issues and then jointly go to China and others that many believe have been cheating in the international system and say, hey, here's how you're distorting international markets. Here's how you're exporting your overcapacity. It's harming all of us. So let's jointly agree on how to bring China back in to the good graces of the international trade system.
Anya, is all this going to save US manufacturing?
I worry it won't. I work with a lot of US manufacturers. I think the shock to the system of US manufacturing moving overseas was real. And there was not enough done to help the people who were really harmed, whose livelihoods were lost when those factories moved, whether through automation or because they moved to other countries that have lower labor costs. Will they all come back? No. Should some advanced manufacturing definitely come back to the United States? Advanced robotics, some electronics assembly, some semiconductors. I think that is important because it's not just an economic issue, it's also a national security issue. But will we really be manufacturing toys and clothes and things in the United States? I think it's very, very difficult to see that golden age of manufacturing returning here.
And you mentioned national security. The FBI has labelled the economic espionage threat from China the greatest long-term threat to our nation's information and intellectual property. The focus is so much on tariffs. There are other big things to think about here. What would you say is the better strategy, or the strategy that should have more prominence right now than this constant hammer of tariffs, tariffs, tariffs?
Yeah, I think that the US strategy towards China needs to be multidimensional and consistent. And so, in that, I would say working closely with our friends and allies to tell the Chinese, we want you to grow, we want your people to prosper, but if you threaten other interests in Asia or around the world, we're not going to stand for that. So that means freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, ensuring that the Chinese don't bully the poor Taiwanese. You've seen a huge amount of increase in Chinese ships and planes really circulating around Taiwan in a very dangerous way. A lot of aggressive Chinese military posture towards the Philippines, towards, in some cases, Vietnam and others. And the world together pushing back on some of those excesses is important. So that's the security side. On the economic side, I think you and I already talked about it. If the world could get together, because this isn't just a US-China problem, there are lots of people around the world that are worried about Chinese overcapacity, Chinese industrial espionage, Chinese IP theft. If together we could say, hey, we want you to trade with us, but please play by the rules. Those would be two important pillars of a cohesive strategy.
Anya Manuel there. So at times it can feel like no one but Trump thinks tariffs are a good idea. Multinational economic institutions don't like them, the public is skeptical, and they even create a rare split in Republican ranks. Joining us to discuss that and more is our panel. Jonathan Wood, lead geopolitical analyst at Control Risks. He advises companies on how to interpret tariffs. And conservative strategist Sarah Hunt. She's a founding partner at Cornerstone Group and co-founder of the Joseph Rainey Center for Public Policy. We have seen some splits, haven't we, Jonathan? Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, pretty high-profile Republicans who said that they basically don't think tariffs are a good idea. If this does turn into a catastrophe, could that be something that really damages the Republican Party?
Well, there are these different approaches and ideas about tariffs within the party. You have not just those that are traditionally more supportive of free markets and those that are more supportive of protectionist policies, but you also have a range of local and state officials who have economic interests that are very tied up with trade. And so I think there's really a broad tent of interest within the party about the appropriateness of tariffs, but certainly there will be a diverse range of impacts both economically and politically, depending on how tariffs play out.
What do you think, Sarah? Could this be damaging when you have these differing opinions within the party? Could it cause a long-term split?
Differing opinions and the peaceful resolution of differing opinions are what democracy is all about. I think it's healthy to have a conversation. And there are so many ways that President Trump's agenda fits into traditional Republican values. This isn't about trade. This is about national security. This is about the American working class and its economic future. COVID was a test for us in terms of how we might fare at a kinetic global war, and we failed. We don't manufacture things here that we fundamentally need, from medicine to ships. What the president is doing is truly tapping into some fundamental values in the party. There may be some economic pain that's temporary, but he is trying to transform the economy to protect our security and to secure a future for the working class.
That's the big question, isn't it, Jonathan? Is this going to work? Because there's a lot of trade experts, tariff experts who say this is not going to bring back manufacturing to the US. It simply isn't going to work.
Well, there are different objectives that seem to be offered for the US's approach on trade policy. By some accounts, it's to generate revenue to offset tax cuts. By others, it's to incentivize investment in the US and bring back manufacturing. By others, it's to reduce and maybe eliminate the U.S. bilateral trade deficit with all of its trade partners. These objectives are in tension. If we significantly increase tariffs and collect lots of tariffs revenue, we may disincentivize investment in the US. If we bring back a lot of manufacturing capacity, we won't need as much trade from abroad, so we'll collect less tariff revenue. So some of these objectives are certainly in tension. They can't all work simultaneously, but the general consensus among global economic forecasters in particular, the IMF, the World Bank, the UN, the World Trade Organization, is that these tariffs will have a slowing impact on global growth, on global trade, and probably an inflationary impact in the US itself.
And what about the public? I mean, arguably this is risky. You know, we go out to people, we talk to them about tariffs, and a lot of people will say, in principle, I think it's a good idea. And then you say, so things are going to get more expensive, and they say, I'm okay with that, but there's a line. It's where people will potentially lose patience with this policy. And when you look at polls, 57% of Americans think Trump has gone too far in raising tariffs on imported goods. So is there a danger here, Sarah, that this could be a vote loser?
I don't think so. First of all, the American people understand that to transform our economy, much like we did during the Reagan era, there may be some temporary pain. But the reality is we're not seeing an inflationary spiral out of tariffs. There was a recent study out of MIT that showed Trump's last round of China tariffs at 20% raised consumer prices less than 1%. And I think less than 1% is something most Americans are willing to pay for our national security and to create and protect good jobs for American workers here.
And what about businesses who are struggling at the moment? I mean, we spoke to a business owner earlier in the show who it's not the price hikes per se yet, but it's the unpredictability that is proving really difficult to manage. Jonathan, what are you advising businesses in this pretty turbulent period?
Well, that's exactly right. It's really more about what they call trade policy uncertainty. Changing levels of tariffs, changing restrictions on imports and exports, changing levels of investment restrictions and access to markets. Companies don't know where this is all going to end up, and that is making it very difficult at this particular moment to make long-term decisions about where to invest, where to operate, where to build capacity, where to take capacity away. What we essentially advise companies is to do three things: understand, plan, and monitor. Understand where they have exposures to these types of dynamics, to individual trade relationships, where they have operations, where they have supply chain, where they have employees, where they have markets. Plan by using scenarios to consider what's the worst thing that could happen and how would it impact us if we really did get much higher levels of tariffs, or conversely, if we had a great deal that reduced tariffs back to a relatively low level and created new investment opportunities. And third, monitor the situation as it evolves, constantly incorporate new information, figure out what is important to your business, to your sector, to your relationships, and stay on top of that as best as possible.
Yeah, and Sarah, how would you characterize what's going on the world stage when it comes to traditional trade allies? We know there is this trade war with China, but when you look at the more traditional allies, the UK, the EU, is there something to be concerned about here in terms of those now being in jeopardy?
They're all coming to the negotiation table with this administration and with President Trump. They are working on trade deals. You've seen the 90-day pause to allow for that negotiation. Remember, this president is about the art of the deal. He wants to see more investment in the United States. He also wants to see more parity. If tariffs are so bad, why do all of our trade allies have them on our products?
Jonathan, is there a danger here of jeopardizing these alliances that have been in place for a long time now?
There is a danger, and there's a stated danger from some of the U.S.'s biggest and most significant trade partners, especially China, the EU, and our partners in the North American trading region. These are countries that have either directly retaliated for U.S. measures or at least threatened to do so if these negotiations fail to produce a suitable deal. And so 90 days is a short amount of time to resolve what are some very complex and long-standing trade disputes between these countries. I think we can get deals or arrangements in principle, but the details will need to be worked out. And as always in trade policy negotiations, the devil is in the details.
And it's not just tariffs though, is it? There are lots of other things at play here that don't get the headlines like tariffs do.
No, that's exactly right. Tariffs are just one part of these trade negotiations. There are also things like export controls, sanctions, and we've seen other non-economic or trade-related issues being brought into these negotiations around security, technology, investment, and other areas. And so tariff negotiations are important, but they are just one part of a bigger complex. And it means that in some cases, there is potential for disputes in these other areas to derail or at least complicate negotiations over the appropriate level of tariffs.
And just finally, I want to get into Trump's head a little bit, Sarah. He talks about tariffs a lot. They're his favorite word, he says. So what is behind that, do you think?
President Trump is pro-America and he's pro-American workers. And he views tariffs as a negotiation tool, potentially a tool to help fund middle-class tax relief, and a tool to protect our national security by ensuring that we have domestic supply chains for critical industries.
And Jonathan, he is fixated on them, isn't he? These are not going away. He's not going to drop this.
I think that's right. I think there are different objectives depending on the trade partner. For China, for example, tariffs are part of a broader competition in which the U.S. is engaged with China. In some other countries, it may be really more about trade dynamics. So there will be different approaches to different countries, but I don't think that this is an issue that's going away. The president is committed to using tariffs as a mechanism to bring investment back to the U.S., to eliminate U.S. trade deficits, and to raise revenue for the government.
Okay, Jonathan, Sarah, thank you both so much for your time. So, tariffs aren't going anywhere. The numbers, though at the moment are anyone's guess, we'll be watching closely. So do join us next time on Inside America.